Lizelle, it's a lovely second day of spring in Cape Town, and it is really nice to be back at Welgemeend with one of our exhibitions for the month of August and September. And it's lovely to have the opportunity to share it with people and to have a look at what we've put up this year to celebrate some important milestones in our lives.
Indeed, one of them being Frank's 60th birthday. I know you won't say that he's 60, not yet, but it's a happy occasion for both of us, and Frank will tell you more about the theme as well.
Every year we've been doing this exhibition at Welgemeend for 8 years now, and every year we pick a theme, and one year we do a selection of works out of our own collection, and one year we collaborate with friends around the theme. So this year it just so happens that it's all the works are from our own collection. And when being pressed by Lizelle to pick a theme already sort of in January, February this year, so she can start organizing everything, we reflected on the fact that it is my 60th birthday, God willing, shortly, and it would be a nice opportunity to take a bit of a view back, Lizelle, to see what did we do over these years, and how did we put this collection together, and what are some of the special pieces in the collection that we sort of almost would never like to part with, but would also tell the story of how our collection evolved over time, I guess.
I must say, and connecting Frank's 60th birthday and having this lovely opportunity to reflect on our journey as collectors, especially Frank being the driver of our collection, and dovetailing with Welgemeend, especially in this COVID year, is something quite extraordinary and satisfactory.
Yeah, I think in these times one has sort of been battered by COVID in so many ways, and I think it was nice to have an opportunity to celebrate the beauty of life. And at this point in time, one is very reminded of the passing of time and almost a relentless march of time. And so I would like to see 60 as a moment to pause. It's sort of a yield sign rather than a stop sign, because I don't know whether I'll be able to read the stop sign.
Even pauses or something that he finds difficult. Yes.
And anyway, so let's say for a moment, if you yield to the moment and you reflect on our privilege we've been and fortunate we've been to being able to put this collection together over a period of time. And I think Lizelle made a lot more sacrifices than me, because I very often went to go and buy a car because the old car was really finished, and then I come back with another painting in the same car. So that happened more than once, and you know, some really nice potential holidays were always traded in for paying off paintings and sculptures everywhere. The beautiful thing about quality art is that they're really not bound by time. The people who created them, the artists, they didn't let the painting or the sculpture go until it was ready to be sent into the world. Whether it took 1 month or 6 weeks or was spontaneously done in 2 hours, time was not the issue. It was getting the message across, getting the work done to the best and of the artist's ability. So in that way, what is lovely for me about it is that it is truly, that great art is truly timeless. And if we indulge with art, you know, we suspend time. And, you know, I can remember 20 years ago when I saw some of those works for the first time, you know, and recall that moment with clarity. And then I'm as old as the time when we bought these works. And we bought our first work in 1988, when we were just started working as legal article clerks at firms of attorney. And we almost paid them to work there. I mean, they paid us very little, but we, notwithstanding, Lizelle, on the first salary check we got, we happened to be invited to friends who had a little art exhibition going there, and I don't know how the two of us did it, but immediately took all our combined salaries and bought an artwork. And it's also hanging here at Welgemeend, and that really started the collection in 1988.
Every year in August we hang our paintings here. Frank selects them and hangs them, and had a wonderful compliment from a friend and also an artist, Nell Erasmus, who is now celebrating her 93rd birthday, I think, who one day 2 years ago remarked, and that just made the penny drop for me as well, that Frank paints with paintings, and I think you'll see that when we go through the exhibition, and this is what you love to do. And I love watching
it, but I'm not necessarily that good at it. But I
no,
you're
excellent.
It's such a privilege and challenge, I must say, but I like a challenge to hang art in this building, and we would love to show you what we've got. Okay, so maybe this is a good painting to start with, Lizelle. It was a painting by Hugues, which was sort of the first Cape Impressionist. And what was interesting in Hugues was that he went overseas in 1988 already, in 1888. And he studied internationally. He studied in Italy, he studied in France, he went to Venice. And he really had a great art education. And he came back to South Africa in the beginning of the 1900s. And he really made a big mark on South African art by capturing the South African light in a very different way to the artists that came here before, which followed the English tradition of painting. The paintings on my left-hand side, which you might not have a look at the moment, but they are both also from the Cape Mountains and from Cape Town. And this one is particularly interesting for us by Moses Kolder, because he's actually known as a sculptor. And this is one of the very few paintings of his that I ever saw. And what makes it even more special is that it's a painting from Signal Hill on the Muslim graveyard that was on the hill there, overlooking the mountain. So it's, I think, both these paintings are quite significant.
This is one of my favorites. I love Volkskenks work. It is the detail that he puts in. There's often what is albijna? Aloes.
Yeah, aloes.
Aloes, and I'm a fan of aloes. I love aloes, especially in the winter time, because that really brightens up the landscape. And he is a master of detail and getting that moody feeling and capturing the fynbos and capturing the landscape, nature. I love Volkskenks work.
Yeah, and he was also the first totally self-taught Afrikaans artist that actually became famous.
And what I also enjoy, especially about Volkskenks work and perhaps Gwelo Goodman's work and a few others, that painting was painted in 1912. You wouldn't say that. It looked like it came off the easel today. It captures that moment in time, eternally, so to speak.
Yeah, it's interesting, Lizelle, that you mentioned that, because we have 72 different artists on display, 102 works, and the eldest work is actually 1912.
I tried to limit Frank to 60 for the symbolic value of it, but it was just impossible.
Well, 90 is just 60 plus 30, so, it's anything. And 100 is 60 plus 40, so there is a 60 in it somewhere. But, yeah, so it's nice to be able to show works that really over a period of 107 years in one setting, and to exhibit it in this home that's 300 and something years old. As we walk through Welgemeend and the passage, the first work that one will see is this incredible work by Robert Gwelo Goodman that was painted in 1916. It's a scene of Table Mountain. It looks like it could be, most probably, if I look at the color, the soft pinks very early in the morning. And, there's still smoke coming out of the homes there. And it depicts almost where we are standing right now. If there weren't a building behind us, this is what you would have seen many years ago, if you were a little bit higher up. And what makes this painting for me so incredible is the way that he captures the light, and then the buildings are just actually shown with there's very little mark making, almost just little flecks of paint, that he accurately depicts the town as it grew up the hills of the mountain, and then all the trees, and the colors are just incredible. With this is sort of almost obscured because the light from the east will only catch that side of the mountain first. And yeah, this always hangs in Lizelle's office, and is absolutely one of our most favorite works.
Indeed. The way that it hangs in my office is that it's also positioned in a way that if you look out the window to the left, then you see Tafelberg, Table Mountain there. So it's almost a continuation of the eye. So it's quite playful. I wouldn't have thought of it, but Frank, when he hung the painting for me, said, "Do you realize what it is in position to Table Mountain?" And there it was.
Yeah, having just spoken about Table Mountain and the city, this is sort of an intimate view of a Cape interior and of Cape Town, an early picture of Cape Town. This was painted by Jean Vels. He was an architect that grew up in Austria, emigrated to South Africa for health reasons, and started painting, I think, when he was in his 30s already. And you can see his training as an architect coming through very clearly in the way the spatial composition, the way that he uses these forms, and where the table fit in, and where the pots and everything are placed. There's a very, very strong spatial planning element, which one would expect from an architect in this building. Beautiful colors. And this was is a painting of a part of Cape Town, which is only about 1 kilometer from where we are now.
I think that's the center of the book.
That is the center of the book, yeah. And that was this is an incredibly beautiful painting of these buildings as they were. And unfortunately, sadly, we've lost almost all these buildings over time as people, destroyed them, demolished them to build ugly new buildings. And it is such a pity. But this gives us a view in it's not dated specifically, but it's 1957 that he painted that. But I think this could almost reflect this area in the 40s, at which stage he made quite a few works of these. And 1950s really also at the peak of Gregoire's career. And this is a very accomplished work. And I love putting them next to each other because the way that he used these ochres, here you start seeing the greens, the browns, there's a little bit of blue, and then you start seeing a spot of blue. And very nuanced, elegant, in my mind, superbly executed
work, and unmistakably Gregoire Boonzaier.
Yeah.
One can almost not look at that and not recognize the Boonzaier signature.
These two works are by two of South Africa's most famous female artists. The one was, at the bottom is work by Maggie Loubser. And Maggie Loubser had this, she traveled also extensively in Italy and Holland in the 20s, came back, obviously some influence with German Expressionism in her work. You can see she was also acquainted with the Fauvists and the use of color. And when she came to South Africa, she started painting these very idyllic scenes where human endeavor and natural behavior by animals and birds are actually presented in a very harmonious way. Beautifully executed. Got a famous provenance. It used to belong to a previous state president of South Africa. Yeah, so it's got a nice story behind it. And this was also a work, it's really the truth that one day I went to go and buy a new car or another car, look at a car, drove past our friend Johannes Boerman's gallery, saw this in the window, made a U-turn and bought this painting. And yeah, it's been a treasure of us ever since. And above it is a very sophisticated and complex little watercolor by Mort Sumner. Now, Mort Sumner lived between London, Paris, and Johannesburg entire life. She was also a poet, she wrote literature, and she was a very accomplished painter. And in her painting career, she went through very different, a lot of different careers. And she was very influenced by what was happening with Cubism, the sort of breaking up the planes, flattening the surface. And so what she does there with a normal watercolor by introducing these very strong vertical lines, she almost creates a sort of pierced veil so that the painting reveals itself at the back. And what Piet Mondrian used to do is to say that he painted the way that the cloud, the sky between the branches of a tree. And there's something very similar. She was very influenced by Mondrian, and I think there's something of that in this work. Now, this is one of our favorite corners at Welgemeend, I think, Lizelle, with this beautiful grand piano. It was very carefully restored the last couple of years, so this room has got a wonderful sense of presence. And so we decided to, in this room, to hang what I call still life, interior and exterior still lifes. All the paintings in this room have a very quiet quality to them. We spoke about the beautiful painting of Guelo Gutmann and the Jean Val's interior, the Gregoire Boonzaier, the Maggie Loubser. All these works have got a very quiet, almost introspective and gentle quality to them. And it's almost true about the three still lifes behind us, Lizelle, and that's done by Maggie Loubser. As I said, that was the same artist who painted the flamingos that we referred to a little bit earlier. She was also very fond of still lifes. As I said, she traveled extensively, went overseas twice, was very well au fait with the tradition of still life. And this is one by Irma Stern, who was sort of the doyen of South African art scene, most probably, in many years, the most famous artist, together with Pinier, maybe of a period. She was known for painting these exuberant still lifes, where the flowers almost popping out of the canvas. And we have one or two of them, but we included in this show a gouache of her, which is sort of almost, for me, almost more a autumn palette to the work, and it's quite restrained by her standards, but a lovely composition. There's a lovely vitality to the flowers, and it's nice to put it next to Maggie because they worked in the same time. They were compatriots. They were very different personalities. Maggie being very introverted, Stern being very much an extrovert. So it's nice to hang them, and then to juxtapose them with Georgina Gratrix, who's really a up-and-coming rising star on the contemporary scene in South Africa, has also exhibited worldwide now in a number of major museums. And she painted this incredible painting called Friday Night. But what Georgina does there, which is so amazing, is she includes the whole Friday night family gathering in one work. There are 4 people smoking. There are a lot of laughter. There are palm trees in the still art. There's a
delicious bottle of wine there.
Yeah, there's a big bottle of wine, and it's very, very festive. And the way she applies her paint in pasto, it's really very thick application of the paint. There's a sort of uncontrolled joy one feels about the way paint is applied to the canvas, and yeah, it's a riotous assembly in every possible way.
Georgina's paintings always has this energy to it and this sense of fun. But one would be mistaken if you just look at it and think it's all fun, and because there's always something deeper.
It's nice to work for, you know, in hanging this space to contrast it with the work on my left here by Penny Siopis. Now, Penny was a lecturer at Magnolias, at the art school linked to the University of Cape Town, and she's become a very established and recognized artist worldwide. Was exhibited extensively, was included in the South African exhibition at the British Museum a couple of years ago, and became very influential as a teacher and as a avant-garde painter who constantly challenges herself and, you know, constantly reinvents her work. So she's very innovative, Penny, and when she made these, what she called lace paintings or cake paintings in the early 80s, she grew up, her father had a confectionery store, and she used to work, you know, decorating cakes and things with, I don't know what you call that squeegee, Lizelle, where you push the cream and things through to decorate the cakes. So there's an element of that she brings to this work, which is a table laden with cakes, a sort of a Swiss roll type thing here, and there's a tart of sorts. I'm
sure it's an apple pie, and it looks delicious.
Pie maybe, yeah.
I'm getting quite hungry.
Apple pies over here, and some macaroons maybe, and other things. But it's quite a fleshy application when you look at these things. But in a way, how she creates the blacks and the blues in the background, she uses almost a pointillist technique of putting 2 colors next to each other, and your mind will link the yellow and the blue and make it green. So it's incredible amount of really fine brushwork in here, and still a very contemporary, and at the time, I think, incredibly challenging composition. And these paintings are now highly collectible, and we're very fortunate to have come across one that we really fell in love with. Yeah, South Africa was very blessed in the late 1800s. When a number of Dutch-trained artists came to South Africa and made their home mostly in the north of the country, Pretoria and Johannesburg. And maybe they came because of the gold rush that was on the go at the time. And Frans Oeder was one of them, and he came with Anton van Wouw to South Africa in around 1888, 1890. They were incredibly well trained. They went, some of them, to Barbizon school. So the Dutch and the French way of painting was very embedded in their background. So when Oeder came to South Africa, he played a critical role as a mentor to a number of emerging artists, including J.H. Pinier, who became one of the most famous South African artists. And this work is an early work by Oeder, and it's almost got, for me, a Japanese quality of these floating magnolias.
Very delicate.
It seems to be placed on a table or almost floating on water, but they're just floating out there somewhere. And so it's a lovely composition, and I love it with the orchids that Lizelle put next to it, and to complement these flowers. But again, the way that the shadows are created are sort of very classically trained, very strong Dutch influence, and it's interesting enough, very similar techniques that's used by Gwele Goodman in the lovely picture of Cape Town that we saw.
So we are really very fortunate to have a hanging system, and we did the same here in Welgemeend, which makes it very easy to, you know, to change works. You can take them off in seconds and put other works on, and it's such an innovative system. I'm not sure why one doesn't do it everywhere, because it allows you to play. And if there's someone that plays with paintings, it's certainly Frank. This was the one work that I was very surprised to see on the show. I must tell you that I loved it from the first moment because of many things I can tell you. But please tell me, where does it come from, and why do you like it so much? Because you never buy anything unless you really love it. So.
This is almost a two-of-a-kind work for us, Lizelle. And this work is very important, you know, very significant for a number of different reasons. And the one was that when we were at university, and even before you joined university, and I got to know you in my second year, I was on my way to a Latin class, and I heard a commotion, and there was an exhibition hall at the university, which is now University of Johannesburg, and I turned left and I went to have a look at what everyone was going on about. And there was obviously people drinking wine, and I saw the lovely artworks up everywhere. And I thought, you know, how can Latin compete with this? This sounds like a lot more fun than Latin. And I went in, and it actually was a retrospective exhibition of this artist, Armando Baldinelli. And now Baldinelli was born in Italy, came to South Africa, and spent most of his adult life as a professional artist here. And Baldinelli, this show was opened actually by two people, two of his colleagues, and the one was Eduardo Villa, who was a very famous sculptor, and the other one was Walter Batters, some of whose work we've got on the exhibition. And it was incredible, and that was my first exposure to a real art exhibition with real artists opening it, and artists that Batters was a professor, Villa was extremely the most well-known sculptor, and as you know, at university, he donated a lot of his sculptures to university, and we sort of grew up with it. And for the first time in engaging with Villa, I understood a lot more of his sculptures. And then Batters talking about Baldinelli was amazing. So Baldinelli was important because it was my first real engagement with art, and that was also the day I decided that one day, if I'm lucky enough, I'm going to become an art collector. And if I am an art collector, I would like to collect as representative a range of South African art as was possible. So this work came up on auction at Strauss & Company about a year or two ago. And I was super excited when I saw it, because it's entirely made out of found material. And you will remember when we were in Italy, we went to Janus Canulli's show at Venice Biennale, and he was sort of a main proponent of what they call arte povera. And he also worked in that with that mindset where you only included found objects into a work and created a painting out of that. So this work, there's a bit of paint applied to these found objects, but it's really all the texture and structure are created by found objects. And it's called Remembrance of Kyoto. In Remembrance of Kyoto, it was done in 1966, and it also references the Coutilla movement, which we know because we love Christo Coutsia's work, and he was a member of the Coutilla movement. So this work was accordingly, for me, I was so excited when I got it at the auction, I jumped up and down. And I then haven't actually seen it in real life, and when I actually saw it, I fell in love with it, and I'm so happy that you also like it. If we look at for a moment at this work over here, which was painted by Erik Loubser, also an artist that we really enjoy and that we have a number of examples of. And Erik spent some time in Paris. He studied with Legier. He was very well versed in the works of Picasso, Braque, all the main sort of artists of the time in Paris. And I love the way that when he came back to South Africa, he integrates almost this Legier-like forms on a Cezanne flat plate with the South African landscape at the back. And when I hung these two works together, what I just started seeing was these circles that are everywhere in their work, in the beautiful work there of Baldinelli's and in this work. And I always think he was, at one stage, was interesting that Erik Loubser was a paint salesman.
Paint as in house paint.
Yeah, in house paint, yeah. But he still had this ability to put the most amazing, strong primary colors together in one canvas and make it work in a way that is still, I think, very harmonious and, yeah, but still quite arresting, I think. While we're staying with the 60s and the early 70s, it's a good time to have a look at one of our absolutely most favorite works. But yeah, Lizelle will say that's true of every work. But in this case, Hanneke van der Walt was a South African painter that at one stage in life was almost more famous in Brazil and in South America than she was in South Africa. And she painted these sort of deconstructed and abstracted landscapes. And to a certain extent, it looks a bit like a dreamscape as well as a landscape. But interesting enough, once you start engaging with the work, you start looking and recognizing some well-known structures. And this is actually, she lived in Johannesburg. And she painted this painting of Hielbrau, which is a high-density suburb in Johannesburg that was very proud of the fact that it had the tallest building in Africa for many years, which was the Ponte building, which was an absolute tower, cylindrical tower block, round, with you know, all sorts of antenna and advertising signs at the top. And it was the tallest building in Africa for a very long period of time. And this is what she's painting here, with the lights on, with the little tower on the roof and everything. So you have the Ponte building, next to it is the tower of Hielbrau, and you've got the highway called Harrow Road that goes through the town, and then the rest of Hielbrau over here. So she's obviously flattened the whole picture and, you know, put it on one plane, but I find it incredibly beautiful, just the way she's broken up these colors. And yes, it sort of hints at where it is, but it's an incredible number of rich colors, and it's still a soft and inviting painting. And she also spent quite a lot of time in Paris, and she painted this just after she came back. And you can see the similar influences that we just saw on the Erik Loeb show at work here. And she also did these hard edge paintings, and this was a period when she moved away from the hard edge and softened the edges almost. And yeah, I think still a very interesting mix between an abstract painting with a sort of realistic origin. Well, Lizelle, while we're talking about the 60s and 70s, we cannot do it without talking about Christo Coutilla, I guess, who's a South African artist that lived abroad extensively, and he was in Paris from the late 50s throughout the 60s. He was in Tokyo, in Kyoto, in 66, 65, 66, and was very much part of the good time movement, which included these found objects in the paintings. And then he came back, and he went back to Galerie Stadler, which was his gallerist in Paris, and he had an incredible exhibition with Tapier and Lucio Fontana, and, you know, so he really mixed with the best at the time. So he painted this work in that time. It's called Collection of Storm Elements. And one can sense all these sort of cylindrical sort of figures like, you know, planets or stars or, you know, stars. And then this sort of incredible sense of movement and interaction, intergalactic forces at work as these planets and stars push and pull each other, and that created incredibly dynamic interaction. And you can see sort of almost like the Milky Way in the middle and all these things happening to it. Now, the other thing that's quite interesting is that Christo always included little round things like pennies or small coins in his works, and always these dots. And then he had a riotous use of color, which is, I think, one can see in this work. I mean, that green-blue dash over there, you have to be a very confident artist to mix that with everything else that is happening here. But it really tells the story of that period in his artistic life. It tells that story incredibly well. And yeah, we were fortunate to come across this a couple of years ago and acquire work out of what is now a very sought-after period of his. One cannot really have a collection, of a representative collection of South African art without having actually a number of works by Cecil Scott. He played such a critical role as a lecturer and as a mentor to many artists. And he was a co-founder of the Polly Street Gallery and Artistic Learning Center in Johannesburg, where you know, the great number of emerging black artists went and taught, and were taught there in terms of printmaking and painting techniques, and that was sort of where they got their formal art education and art training. And so woodcuts was obviously a way that was a combination of the innate African ability to do woodworking and to engraving on wood. And it's a very old tradition, as we know. It comes from the Chinese and the Japanese. And what you would do is you would cut out the marks in wood and then fill it with ink and press and paper on it, and you create the negative, and the positive is then the wood cut or lino cut that you sell. And one day Egon Günther, who was his dealer at the time, came to Scotland and said, why don't you use that negative, the actual block, and turn that into a painting? And he started later on in coloring these, and we'll refer to the other work that we have, which was done in the 70s, late or 80s, actually, a little bit later. But in the beginning, he just used these monochromatic colors. It's just the black, and then they let the different shades of the actual colors of the wood come through it. And so it's these three monumental figures. He did a whole series about Jacques, the famous Zulu king, and I think this comes out of that period. And I love the really fine engraving that's on it, and the very subtle hint of colors everywhere with these monumental, very strong figures, which I think refers back to the sort of figures Picasso and Diego Rivera did at that point in time. So a beautifully executed work from a person who played an incredibly constructive and important role in South African art history. This is one of the earliest works from the 1950s that we've gotten shown. It was done by Eugene Lavishay. Now, Eugene also studied in Paris, as one can see, very influenced by Braque and the whole Cubism movement. And he creates these interlaying levels that he interlocks. And at first it looks all very abstract. But for me, it's always interesting the role that the title of an artwork play in shaping your perception of the artwork. And in this instance, it's called the artist's father reading a newspaper in an interior. And when you start looking, you can see the figure sitting here with the newspaper draped over his lap. And he's sitting there reading. There's the table, the thing flattened out with a nice Cézannesque tablecloth over it. You can start making out the rest of the building, the big chair that he's sitting in. And once you see it, you can't believe that you missed it in the first instance. But there's another reason, apart from the fact that I really love Eugene Lavishay's work, and that is that my father, who's passed away 2 years ago, so absolutely loved reading the daily paper, and you would travel a great distance to go on the farm to go and fetch a paper so that he could read it. And later in his life, he read 4 or 5 papers every day if he could. And this is such a strong, for me, such a strong connection to my dad and his newspaper reading, which is a tradition that I also took up.
I love this because of the playful and lightness of the Kolder, and I think Frank included it just to make sure that it would go with my clothing.
Exactly. I always buy paintings that goes with the furniture and the curtains, as you know. And but obviously, Frank Kolder is a very famous international artist. It's almost the only international artist that we've got included in this exhibition, and I love, his mobiles. It's sort of really incredible mix of agility and movement and color and whimsical all at the same time. William Kentridge is most probably the most famous of all South African artists worldwide. And he's created this incredible range of works over, since the early 80s. And one of the very strong recurring themes in his work in the early years were Ubu, the character from a play, and Ubu had this sort of tragic-comic nature to it. And he, like Robert Hodges, who we'll talk about in a second, Kentridge was really very strong and tackled the social issues and the social dilemmas of the day. The story about Ubu and the general was, for me, so poignant because, and another example, there's from edition of 35, and used to belong to a very famous dealer in South Africa that's now passed away, from a personal collection. But another edition of this work was actually the first work of William Kentridge that was shown at the Museum of Modern Art. And I particularly love this one because of the colors, and it's just got that eye with a red line through it. And it shows, a person in my mind that's dwarfed, notwithstanding all these medals, by the responsibilities that rest on that person, and its inability and his inability to cope with all of that. And you see that almost sense of defeat, notwithstanding the ostensible display of power, you get a very strong sense of vulnerability and weakness. This is another work I included to go with Lizelle's jacket. As you can see, all the nice red. And, but this work is by Robert Hodges, a very famous South African artist that passed away in 2010. And we were privileged enough to have met him a couple of times. He had a great sense of humor. He had a great freedom in the way he used colors. And in this work, you know, you have these tan khaki colors with a pink background, which I don't think any other artist would use. You've got these sort of broken down horizons everywhere, but it's called the consulting room. And I include it here specifically because we are in this COVID time. And, you know, a lot of us have been to the doctor much more often than we would like to. And I love the way that he sort of depicts the waiting room, the 3 patients waiting. And then here is 1 patient already with the doctor. Now, the target of his satire, you know, was always people in power. So he often poked fun, as you know, remember, Lizelle, with priests, businessmen, any form of general, doctors, anyone who thought they had a level of authority or assumed they had a level of authority was a sort of a legitimate target for Robert Hodges. So,
and how that, just that dash of color, if you look at the yellow, just the 2
yes.
yellow dots and slightly on his body, how it almost contains everything.
Yeah, it allows your eye to travel through the painting. So if you start seeing a bit of yellow here, you see the yellow there, and then that little, the tie of the doctor, whatever, you know, you can sort of, the stethoscope is also in yellow. And the thing. So there's only like 4 or 5 colors in the entire painting, I think, that is used, but it's still, it's both subtle and powerful at the same time. Well, we're in the contemporary section of the exhibition. These are a number of works by contemporary African, South African and African artists. The first one we have on the left is a work by Simpiwe Nzube called The Inevitable Journey to Mars 3. And it's an incredibly interesting process. He takes a photograph, it's put on dye bond, it's then painted over, and then he creates these sort of stenciling and images. So it technically, incredibly complicated process that Simpiwe follows. I think it's a very powerful and enigmatic work, and you know, it's lovely to have it, and it always evokes a lot of conversation. Yeah, so looking at that work, it sort of logically leads us into these 2 works. This is a work by Teresa Firmino, really about the aftermath of what happened to soldiers after they'd been decommissioned. You know, the typical soldier with all the injuries, 1 leg, but still sort of having these dreams of having achieved the sort of the colonial ideal, I guess. And you know, the role models that the kids put up for themselves, how they should look and be, and how that fights with reality. And then Zemba Luzambu next to it, also a very interesting work, very powerful, and it deals with migration and the difficulty of finding an identity, a new contemporary African identity, as you move between, you know, the sort of your cultural heritage and where you come from, and contemporary society and where we're going to. As is this by Wallen Mapondera, it's also going to the Venice Biennale next year. And he's in Zimbabwe. Zimbabwe, as we know, has been through really tough economic times, and people had to make a living out of very little. And they're very creative, and it's incredible the number of Zimbabwean artists that's come to the fore in the last couple of years. Incredible. And yeah, this work is all found material. These are actually wine boxes.
And I find it remarkable that somebody would think of a box, a cardboard box, and that could become an artwork, and that it could be as aesthetically pleasing as this one. And also the technique. You have to be very skilled to take up a number of little boxed squares and put it together and create something so beautiful that your eye, you know, that automatically takes your eye and flows. I marvel at this work. I think it's so creative.
Yeah, this is also a very enigmatic work by Nicholas Schlobo, an artist that's established a name for himself internationally, represented by Lehman Malpen in New York, through which I actually acquired this work. And Nicholas deals with sort of quasi-identity in these changing times, and sort of linking this with the experience in the past, and observed from his mother and his parents how they may do created things, and then what is happening in real life.
What I like about the arrangement that Frank has put here, the curating aspects of it, is that although it's fine art and it's beautiful to look at and it's stimulating, it's also a homage to crafts, because there's so much fine detail, and it does honor good craftspersons.
Yeah, one of the centerpieces of the exhibition is this large-scale work by Martin Mafu, and it's called Mosereledi, Protector 1. And it's about the role of women in certain societies in South Africa, which are still very circumscribed in terms of the role that you can play. But how women, notwithstanding that, find the ability to create beauty and healing and meaning in those lives. So I think it's sort of it's a beautiful homage to women and what the incredible role women plays in keeping communities and families together. And so the stitching is also, stitching things together, fixing things, linking them together. Yeah, and it is nice to hang it next to that work of Gerald Krieger, who literally paints with paint. And she creates these quasi-sculptures where she takes a dry paint in strips and then places them on and weaves them onto a flat surface. And they then dry, and as they dry, they shrink and they move by themselves. So the element of chance with the element of design, that interplay, is quite interesting, and that one that dropped open over there. But what is so amazing about this work is how it reflects the light from different places and then create all these shadows on certain sides and light.
I find it fascinating, both stimulating both the head and the senses.
Yeah. These two works are by our friend Beezy Bailey and Barend de Wet, two absolute characters in the South African art scene. So, yeah, next to the painting, the wall call of Barend's, we hung a painting by Beezy Bailey, who's a friend of ours and a real larger-than-life character, and brought a lot of joy to a lot of people over the years with his work and his comments and the way he goes about things. And we've laughed a lot together, Beezy and I. And this work, in the series of work, Beezy referenced the time when Nelson Mandela was released from prison. This is the moment that I think George Hallett photographed, the photograph where he actually met Joe Schlobo, a compatriot of his, for the first time in many, many years, and the joy of that moment. And sort of the peace that was flowing, or the hope for peace that was at that time, was very, very prevalent in South Africa, and he captures it with his peace stuff. And the beautiful pink roses here. So I think it's a very powerful painting, and we're very happy to have it. And yeah, as I said, and Beezy and Barend were very good friends, and yeah, this is a way maybe for Beezy to pay homage to Barend as well. This large-scale work is also very dear to Lizelle and myself. It's called by Deborah Bell, who was a contemporary of William Kentridge, and collaborated with Robert Hodges and William Kentridge, who we spoke about earlier. And this is a work called Journey of the Magus 3, and it creates this sort of she created this very enigmatic figure that is made up of different elements almost, that are all symbols of importance in African folklore. But what makes this work particularly fascinating for me are these two shadows, and it's like our lives. You know, if we look back what we've done in the past, there's a very clear shadow that you cast. To the extent that the shadow can be clear, it's always just an outline. But people can normally recognize that's you, that is what you've done. Whereas if you look at a person from the front, you know, sort of where are they going and heading to, you have this very uncertain, you know, a great uncertainty about what type of shadow are your future behavior going to cast. And that sort of living in this moment between the past, the present, and the future, the tension between all of those are really quite important for Deborah in her work. And this is also almost hung at this exhibition for myself, because I think at turning 60 is a moment like that where you can reflect on what you have done up to now and the shadow that you've cast, and then sort of what you hope to do. What are your dreams? What do we want to do with the 20 or 30 years or so that one has got left? Yeah, and who knows what the fortune holds. So for me, this is sort of for myself, by myself, thanks to Deborah, on the 60th, I think it reflects this moment in time very well. As I said, we tried to, the theme in this room is really interior and exterior still lifes. And this is a sort of a combination of a very modern interpretation of a still life, because the artist Karel Nel was a professor at the University of the Witwatersrand, well-known lecturer, and also an artist that's collaborated with other artists across the world, very involved in mapping and painting a certain 2 square degrees of the universe is the project that he is involved with. His works are collected by major museums across the world. So this work is a series of works that he did after he came back from the Seychelles, and he collected this Seychelles palm. The texture of this work is incredible. It's called Presence, Leaf Shrine, North Island, Seychelles, and yeah, exquisite work. But what this work is, it's got a lot of lines to it, very sort of linear composition, strong lines of the palm tree. So we normally find that it's very difficult to hang anything next to this work because it's sort of got so much energy, it pushes other works away. So in order to combat that, we decided to hang 2 very quiet paintings next to it in order to stay with the sort of very calm atmosphere we wanted to create in this room. Next to the Karel Nel on the other side, I hung a work by Mort Sumner called Lake. And it depicts this really peaceful scene of the sun setting over the sea or a big lake. In this case, it's interesting that she calls it lake because it reminds me of sort of the Gansbaai and Manus area. If you look at the, you know, where the landscape there and the way the sun is setting. And she's sort of breaking down the colors as the sun sets at that time, and you can see the greens and the yellows. For me, it's an incredibly meditative work. It's almost a Rothko-esque in its quality, and it's very calming. You can feel a great sense of peace when you engage with this work. And I like the idea of putting something of, you know, an island of water next to Karel's work, because the Seychelles is an island in the Indian Ocean, and yeah, I like the linkage between that and this work.
We were just talking about how difficult it is sometimes to, if somebody asks you, what are your favorite paintings, to identify the favorite paintings, because it depends on the context, it depends on the time of life that you find yourself in, and you often find that you change favorites. You know, something's a favorite now, and then at a later stage you've grown out of it, or you rediscover something that makes you appreciate it more. So it's always difficult to identify favorite. But for me, 2 of my favorite artists are hanging right here. The one being John Mayer, and the other being Keith Alexander. And I sometimes ask myself, what are the commonalities here? Why are they favorites of mine? And I think there are many reasons, but the stillness of it, the quietness that underlies it, the silence in the paintings is something that attracts me. But silence is not all that these 2 have in common. They're not happy paintings in a certain sense, but they're evocative, both of them. I enjoy the beautiful brushwork, the fine detail that both John Mayer and hyper-realistic Keith Alexander put into their works.
Yeah, Lizelle, these 2 works work really well together, the John Mayer and the Keith Alexander, and I know this is an absolute favorite of yours, and yeah, maybe you can tell us why.
Keith was, if I understand it correctly, born in Zimbabwe. I think he was born in 1946, just after, you know, sort of the Second World War, and then had his schooling in London, and returned to South Africa, or came to South Africa and lived here. I think he went to varsity in KwaZulu-Natal, what was then Natal. But he, shortly after becoming a serious painter, if I can use that phrase, I think it was his wife, Elizabeth, that first suggested that they visit Namibia. And it was love at first sight for Keith Alexander, as I understand it. But not necessarily the beauty or the color or the richness of the landscape, the power of nature to overwhelm human beings, the isolation, the loneliness. It's difficult for me to put into words what I find in Keith's paintings, but that is also something that I think every painting of his that I see, I find an element of, and again, maybe I am now reading things into the artist's life that I don't know of, but I see a sense, a strong sense of being alone, of loneliness, of isolation, and of loss. He died in 1998, I think, of cancer. This was painted shortly before that, and it was homage to a Johannesburg chef. And what I like about this especially is the fact that time merges. It's both the future and the past that you find in this painting. We are waiting. There's a sense of imminent arrival. We're waiting to be seated at a feast table, but at the same time, the sands of time are already covering this building, which is already abandoned. You can see the broken window.
We're fortunate to own a number of works by one of the foremost artists in South Africa, J.H. Pinier. And Pinier was a painter of South African landscapes. And when he painted buildings, he only painted buildings that he thought were well integrated into that landscape. So he had an architectural background, just like Jean Wel's. And in this work at the top, he paints a beautiful harmony that these rocky outcrops and the homes that the people who lived in that area built for themselves, how symbiotic they merge together in the landscape. And it's a painting of this enormity of these rocks, and but how much these little houses are at home and sheltered almost by that environment. So it's very peaceful, and it's a work done almost just in two colors. I mean, it is blue and brown, and with a bit of gray, which is red, I think, and brown together. And this is sort of a landscape that people are more attuned to for Pinier, and it's a landscape of the Karoo, which, as we all know, is a huge arid area, mountainous, very dry. And I think he captures that sunlight that falls on these mountains in this work absolutely beautifully. And if you drive through the Karoo, you would instantly recognize the feel of this place. And we all feel that, yes, I have seen this, I have been there. This is what it looks like, and it's got an incredible timelessness to it. This work I didn't just hang to go with Lizelle's jacket, but it's an early work by Francois Krieger, also sort of one of the masters of South African art. It's called Isigudu. It was painted in 1933. It's a beautiful study, and one can clearly see the influence of Gaga and Rousseau on the sort of idyllic interpretation of man and nature, the domestic dog and the other animals, beautifully integrated, very peaceful. I think Isigudu refers to the Xhosa word for paradise, or for something like that. But yeah, I can see at the bottom a lovely homage to Cezanne, the way that he paints these, the cloth with the, I'm not sure, Lizelle, whether that looks like oranges or something that is with it. And it's on the left of it is an early work by Irma Stern, painted in 1929 when she visited the Eastern Cape. And these two works were not painted very far from each other, and this work was painted 4 years after the Stern. And the work by Stern is a lady that she painted a couple of times, and they also, we recently at Strauss sold a beautiful drawing of hers. And, but it's a Pondo lady. It was painted in 1929, and you can, there's a lot of historical significance in what she's wearing. So if you have the ability to decode, you would understand exactly what the headband means, what this, the strap across the shoulder means, and so forth, whether she's married, engaged, have children, and so forth. So in the course of tradition, there were a lot of symbolic, what should we say, other clothes or accessories, which basically told your story. And she's also at the same time, can you see, a very sort of interesting personality. She's almost flirting with the viewer. And I think for 1929, it captures the essence of her for me beautifully, and must have been quite caused quite a bit of a stir when she exhibited it. Now, these two works are by Gerald Sokoto, a famous South African artist that left the country in just after the Second World War, 1946, with a bursary that he won, went to London, then ended up in Paris, and never came back to South Africa. So Sokoto became sort of the grandfather of South African artists, in a certain way, but it's a sad story in many ways because Sokoto left and never came back, and some people really think that he painted his best paintings before he left, but he went on 2 trips to Senegal and he painted these beautiful Senegalese dancers on one of these trips. Walter Battis, I referred to earlier, was the person that made the speech at the Baldinelli opening, which really started my desire or ignited my desire to become an art collector one day. And Walter wanted to visit all the islands in the world, if he could, and he visited several ones of them. So this is an island off the coast of Kenya and Zanzibar, and it's called Women of Mahu Island, and it's this very tropical landscape on the equator, these incredible colors, and you know, the people also wear quite colorful clothing. So for me, it's, you know, you get a strong sense of the density of the forest and the dignity. These very tall people in there with water and blue, just a fantastic fresh painting for something that was done 70 years ago. Yeah, Alexis Brother is after Pinier and you know, almost the most recognized South African male artist, and he also in terms of auction results the last 15 years, he is number 3 in terms of the value of work sold by him. He went through various stages in his life, but he was an extremely accomplished painter, I think. And this is fairly late in his life, a few years before he died. He did this series about all the elements, and this is about water, and it also references the Earth, which is known as the blue planet. It's called Fountain, and you get this very strong sense of dynamic interaction as the Earth was formed, you know, just after the Big Bang. There were these enormous forces, and he captures it with these really broad and vigorous brush strokes. And, you know, eventually everything evolves to these really fine, super fine forms that you see at the end and floats in these incredible colors. And, yeah, so all in all, I think a very powerful and...
It's almost a violence to the movement.
It's, yeah, it's sort of these dramatic things and then these very quiet ends, and it goes so nice with the orchids, I think, which is sort of almost what he's depicting over here. I think it's fitting that we conclude the exhibition with this work by Judith Mason called The Hands of God. And it really, for me, depicts our lives as these sort of little flickering candles that float in the air, and the hand of God floating through the universe. And we all know the expression that your life can be snuffed out at any moment. And I think this is, rather than a negative version of that, for me this is almost a very benevolent sort of interpretation of that saying, in the sense that all these candles are floating, and they are, you know, happily lighting up the area around them, and they're beautifully painted, and there's something joyous for me in the way that they're painted. And this, I feel there's a very harmonious moment captured here. And she was also a person that had a very difficult life. But for me, this work, Lizelle, I don't know if you agree, has got a lovely quiet presence, but it reminds you of the fragility of life, which again, in the times where we're in, is most probably a very timely reminder for all of us. But, you know, in the end, we must believe that life is good, and, you know, with all the blessings that we've just described and that we're living with, life is truly good, but we understand that we should be grateful for it and appreciate, because at any time it might cease to be so. The small works in the room where we entered are very important to Lizelle and myself, because when we started collecting, we obviously didn't have the funds to purchase large works. And it was so wonderful to be able to buy works on paper, etchings and watercolors and small works. And eventually, when we migrated and could afford certain oils by well-known artists, we could only afford the smallest ones. And in the process, we really uncovered some jewels, and which today, even if we had the means to buy anything else, I would still have loved to have had the possibility to purchase that particular work. And I think the message in that we would like to say is that it's possible to start small and start slow, and also that sometimes you get the most magnificent small works that are as rewarding or as powerful as any large work. And Lizelle, I think that fits also with Lizelle, loves things that are a bit small and well put together and not loud and exuberant or, you know, over the top. And I think that those works really capture something of that.
So there are one or two exuberant and over-the-top things that I absolutely adore.
Yeah, so be it. Thank you very much.